Here we go. Okay, so yesterday so all we've been doing for the past few days is working on New Site, which is our React project. And there are, I believe, 6 different sections of it, and we're going to work on the 3rd section today. We're actually not going to write a ton of React today. What we're going to be doing today is getting data from an API. So what I mean by that is if we come over here, oh, should probably turn that on. There we go. So this is our app as it stands right now. So this is the New Site 3. I pulled it down. I already moved everything over, okay? So that's going to be in the instructions. You're going to have to copy some stuff over. You absolutely need to pull down this new repo because it has a ton of new stuff in it. And then pull over just your components from before. Now, as it stands right now, as the way we have it written right now, in my source folder, I have a folder called data, which is just a JSON file with all of my data in it, right? So essentially, I'm storing all my data locally. Like I'm storing it all in my React project. And that is not how it's going to work in the real world, right? Essentially, what you're going to have is you'll have a front end built in React, and then you'll have a back end. In our case, it will be built in Django. So next week, we'll connect these two. And what will happen is Django will take care of storing all of your data in a database, retrieving it depending on what you need from the database, and delivering it to the front end for you to use in the form of JSON. So it's not going to be too much. The way we deal with the data is not going to be that different. It's just how we get the data that's going to change. Right now, we're directly importing it. And I don't even remember where are we importing this. In app? Homepage?
Article T02.
Homepage. We're doing it in a couple places, but one of the places we're doing it is in homepage. So we're saying there is a file news, or there is data news that's in a file that is relative to my JavaScript, right? So we're gonna remove that today and pull data in from an API. So the first thing I want to go over is just how do we get data, and this is will be a little bit of a review because we did go over this briefly when we did some front-end stuff. But we're just going to look at how do I get data from an API with JavaScript. So we'll do it without React first. Then we'll come back. We'll take a break. We'll come back into React and see how do I hook that up now into React. Okay? This one? This is the top.
How come capital NEWS is what you're doing?
I think I could call that whatever I want. Where is it? I'm importing it as a variable so that I can use it. Yeah. This is just like, when I import JSON, it's going to give me the whole, like, it's a big, giant JSON array, kind of.
And then you use it in articles, news.
Exactly. Exactly. It's going to be this giant array.
So that way,
point.
you could call it everything as long as the
Yes.
from.
Exactly. From a place that has JSON in it. Yeah, good question. Okay. So let's leave this aside for now and come over here. So actually, let's not even do that first. Let's go to what is it called? I forgot already. Placeholder. Here it is. Okay. So this is a site. We used this before. I don't know if you guys remember, but it essentially gives you endpoints that you can hit that will return JSON, and it's just dummy data. So it's just it's more like lorem ipsum, like we were using yesterday. So what does it mean when we return JSON? When we were making full stack Django applications, we were having Django would read from, someone would make a request to Django, right? And they would say, like, give me the list page of all the cars. And so Django would hit the database, pull all the cars out of the database, turn them into Python objects, and then we would insert them into the template layer which would render it all in HTML. And then we send the client back HTML, CSS, JavaScript, right? All that stuff. What we're going to do now is remove that last part. So like Django or whatever your backend is, I'm going to make the same thing. I'm going to make an HTTP GET request for, say, a list of to-dos is what we're going to do here. And it's going to, whatever their backend is, let's pretend it's Django. Django is going to hit their database, do, to-dos.objects.all, get all of those. But instead of putting them inside of a template and returning that, it's going to format it in the form of JSON, which is what? Who remembers what JSON is? JavaScript object notation. And what is it technically?
It's an object. The string keys.
So whatever object, string, these are all correct at some point in JSON's life. But the way JSON lives is when we're sending it over the internet, it's a string. It's just a string, right? But it's formatted like a JavaScript object, meaning it has the curly braces and the colons to indicate key value pairs. It has commas to indicate elements in a list, right? So when it's sent over the internet, it's just a string. And then when it hits our front end, we can use JavaScript to convert it to an actual JavaScript object, which will behave like we expect, where I can use indexing to get things out of the list. I can do .key to get the value of something, right? But as it's traveling over the internet, it's a string. And then when it gets to my JavaScript front end, I turn it into a JavaScript object, right?
And to be clear,
yeah.
JavaScript front end is the portion where the customer or the client or the person using it is their computer usable.
Absolutely. Yep. Yes, absolutely. So I want to just see I want to show you what that looks like real quick. So I said this is all just set up with endpoints that we can hit, and we can just it'll just deliver us the data. But instead of delivering it to us in a template, it delivers it to us as JSON. So here's one of their endpoints right here. And I'm going to get all the to-dos. So let's see. I'm going to put this up in my address in the whatever bar here. And I'm making, whenever I put something in here and I hit enter, the browser makes a GET request for me, right? So I'm making a GET request to JSON placeholder dot whatever / to-dos. Cool? And it's going to deliver something back to me as a response. And so what it delivered, and it's formatted nice because I have this JSON plugin here, but if it was, we can view the raw. It doesn't deliver a template back to me, right? It just delivers the raw data as JSON, which we should be a little bit familiar with now. It's going to be an array, and then it's going to have a bunch of objects inside of it, right? And we can see the structure of these objects is they have a user ID, an ID, a title, and a completed, because these are like fake to-dos. Cool. Any questions on this so far? Because this is at the heart of everything we're going to do today. Pretty good? So we're making a GET request, we're getting JSON back.
Josh, when you ran it, actually, never mind.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. That sounded like it was going to be an interesting question.
Well, I was just looking at the code on the site, and it used the fetch.
Yeah, I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. We're going to get to that. Right? I will get to that. Good question. Right now I'm having the browser do all the work. The browser makes the GET request. The browser handles the response. Go ahead, Holly.
The response, I guess. You're saying the browser is the JSON placeholder. I guess I'm
JSON placeholder, imagine that is our Django application. It's sitting on a server somewhere, and it's just an application that has a database of all these to-dos.
So you're going to use like a website. Something, I don't know. What is JSON placeholder like typing into your browser?
What is this?
Yeah, what's the equivalent of it? I guess something that I would understand. I get that this is like a sample thing, but I don't know what it's an example of.
Like IKEA too.
Yeah, like do you remember in Ticketmaster when that's a great.
It's like an
yeah, just like exactly
Okay.
Ticketmaster. I completely forgot we did that. That's exactly what we're doing again.
Okay.
So yeah, Ticketmaster didn't deliver us HTML with all its data. It just delivered us the data as JSON. Yeah.
Just like a
Exactly. Exactly. It is a fake API. Okay, cool. So this is with the browser. This is all I want to illustrate here is like this endpoint is programmed to only return JSON, right? And that's how you're going to work with a lot of APIs, including the ones we build ourselves, right? So now how do I deal with this on the front end? Again, this might be a little bit of a review, but we'll go over it. So what I have over here is just a simple HTML file. It has one H1 in it. And then down at the bottom, I'm importing a JavaScript file that's empty right now, right? So we remember this from our front end. So let me open this. And it's just a blank page. Cool. So now what we're going to do is rather than, like, this is no good to me, right? Because displaying data like this for us as programmers is fine. But for a user, that's not what we want to do. We want to put it into some sort of template or eventually show them HTML and style it so that it's more interactive, et cetera, right? So we're going to actually make the call with JavaScript. So the JavaScript will make the call instead of the browser. And then when we receive this JSON data, instead of it hitting the browser and just displaying, we can do stuff with it and display it however we want. So the way I make do you remember how were you making the API calls when you did the Ticketmaster? With the request library. Yeah, so Python has a library called request or requests or something like that. Most programming languages will have some way for you to make HTTP requests, right? They'll have a library for that. The JavaScript one is called the fetch API. And it uses a couple of different things that we're going to talk about. So if I do fetch, and then actually first, I'm going to do const. So I'm going to take that same to-dos URL that I posted in the browser. I'm just going to save it to a variable and make it easier to use. I'm going to say fetch, and then all fetch is like the request, right, for Python. And all fetch does is it makes a GET request, in this case, to whatever I give it. So fetch is going to make a GET request to this endpoint, right? And then what do I want to do? Cool. Explain this in a second. Did I spell it wrong? Response. Okay. I tend to do that. Okay, so fetch will make the GET request. Now, fetch doesn't return the raw JSON to us. It returns something called a promise. Does anybody know what a JavaScript promise is, or come across a JavaScript promise? Yes? Who can give it a whirl to explain it?
Doesn't it wait for another condition to be true?
Yes, it does. Go ahead, Christian.
It's like an asynchronous function that, like, when you make a promise, you're expecting to get something back.
Yeah.
And you can make even, I can't remember how to do it. Maybe it's stuff. But you can check to make sure it's what.
Check to make sure it's what?
Like what comes back from the promise is.
No, you're all on the right track, right? So a promise is an object, so that we should be pretty comfortable with at this point, right? Promise is an object, and basically it says that it will return something eventually, right? Eventually you will get something back. So when we make this fetch request, it's asynchronous, right? Because if we made this fetch request and it takes time to get these requests and response, and depending on how busy the server is or whatever, it could take a while. If we didn't have an asynchronous way to do this, our whole program would stop when this fetch request runs, right? And it would stop, and wait as long as it needed to for the request to come back. So the way that JavaScript handles that so that the other code can continue to run while we're waiting for stuff to come back from the API call is what's the promise. So fetch returns a promise, and then the promise can have 3 states. It's either resolved, pending, or I can't remember the exact word for it, but it errors out, basically. It's an error, right? Yes, Mike.
Could you console log the?
Yeah, I'm gonna do that in a second. But I just want to get that concept out, right? So fetch is gonna return a promise, and the way that we grab and handle promises is with this .then that I'm struggling to get the language out. That we let me do this. What is this called? Chain, that we chain onto the fetch, right? So it's going to run the fetch. Then when the fetch is going to return a promise, it's going to pass to the then. And the then will wait for the promise to resolve before it kicks out something else. And what it kicks out is going to be another promise, but we'll get to it. Okay, so enough talking. Let's run this and see what it actually looks like. So remember, I'm importing this in my HTML file. And what I'm telling my JavaScript to do is make this variable, run this fetch to the URL, and then it's going to get a response, and I'm just going to console log the response. Cool, so let's come over here, inspect, get our console, and we'll refresh, and here's our response. So we get this response object. You can see it has headers, it has the status, redirect false. There's a bunch of information here. It also has a body. And the body is something called a readable stream, and that's where our data is, but we can't get it yet, right? So we have to chain another then on to actually get the data. So let's do this. Let's do response, and usually, since it ignores white space, this is how you will see it right now. Response, no, yes. And then another then, and I'm going to say data. Oh, sorry. Yep. Okay. So our data is in the body right here. The way I get it out is with this function called JSON. You can actually see in the prototype down here, there's a function called JSON that's attached to this object. So we call .json. That gets everything out of the body. Let's see if we console log that. That actually gives us what we want now.
Josh, why are you using an arrow between response and?
This is a function. I'm passing it an arrow function.
Oh, okay.
You don't have to before the arrow.
What's up?
You don't have to so.
Oh yeah. Sorry. Let me rewrite this in a way that we've seen before. There's only one parameter, but let's not get into the I guess cool, but I guess not cool way that you can write arrow functions, like 40 different ways. Let's write it in a way that we've seen. So let's do this. Does that make a little bit more sense now? Yeah. So we have a then, we pass it a callback function, which is this arrow function. And then we console log, I think I have an extra, no I don't. Okay. We're gonna console log response.json. So I'm gonna come over here, hit this, and you can see that gives us yet another promise. Right? So we have to chain another then to deal with that promise. So we are going to get rid of this, say return. And whatever this then returns will get passed to this then. JSON. And that, and then we'll console.log JSON.
Does JSON, when you do return response.json, does it automatically create that JSON variable that you're passing to the next then?
Yeah, so what it does is it takes whatever I return here, it passes to this function, and I can call this whatever I want.
So the then is just going to take in
whatever the thing before it did. And you can chain them down, and you will see it chained more. Now, for our purposes, this is the bare minimum to get what we want, and that's what we're going to be working with today, just the bare minimum. But bare minimum, you're going to need these two thens. So, yes. Or no, sorry, when we console log this.
Well, is it supposed to look like that
this
first page that we brought up?
This?
Yes.
Yes, that's what we're hoping to get here. Yeah, and that's what we have right here. Now there are 200 of these things, so it's broken down a little bit differently, but here they are, right? And then just like we can change this to /1 just to get one of them, maybe a little bit easier to read. And now we're just going to get the one object right here.
Oh, now you can see that.
Yeah. So that's a little bit, well, we can even do, here's my favorite.
That's not even a big API.
Look at that. Ooh.
But people fancy.
Console.table. What?
Oh, table. Yeah. So I have a question though. Can you go back to the
Oh.
can you go back to the code?
Yes, to the code.
All right, so since you already then response that error return response.json, then JSON console log table JSON. So you're not changing the JSON again, you're just putting it in the table.
Yeah, so the way this works, for our understanding, for us to be able to do what we need to do today, fetch makes the API call. It passes the response to the first then. That then pulls the data out. Then it passes it to the second then, and then at this point, I do whatever I want with the data. So right now I'm console logging it, but the next step we're gonna do is like insert it into the DOM, right? And like actually display it for the user. Does that make sense? Do we remember this from before? Okay, cool.
When you call response.json, is it return that JSON being JSON, and then you use that later?
You can make that.
This is
So
anything.
that was tricking me too. So now that variable is going to be called.
Okay, since you're getting it from the process.
So it's, yeah, this will return, whatever this returns gets passed in here. And then I call it whatever.
Like they're like a chain.
So that's probably convention then to
So
just
it's
use
like
JSON there,
get something
because
you return
later we're gonna need that, right?
So if we go all, exactly, if we go all the way back to the beginning when we were just making variables, we name our variables as explicitly as possible. And since right now it's JSON. If I was getting something else back, if I was requesting a different file format, like if I was getting CSV down, I don't even know if you can do that, but if I was getting a different file format, then I would call it whatever, right? Cool.
So you're
I might even call this like to do JSON because it's an actual to do.
and then all you're doing in that second then function is just console tabling it.
Yep.
Okay, so you could, essentially you could, if you just wanted to create a variable out of the response.json, you could do that and then you can end it there and then use the variable somewhere else, correct?
I don't know if it would, you'd have to return it. Yeah, because it would still only be, if you made a variable, if we just saved it to a variable, it would only be in the scope of the then. But we're gonna kind of get to what you're talking about when we get to the React part of this. So real quick, since we're getting one of them, right? So let's, it seems like people remember this, but I just want to do this last part. Let's say, let's go over here and we'll just make a p tag. We'll call it ID to do. And then we'll come over here and we'll grab it. We'll say to do equals document dot query selector do. And then down here, we'll say to do dot inner HTML equals to do JSON dot title, I think was one of the things. Yeah, title, okay. So now we're gonna make the API call and we'll see the title will show up. Cool? So just real quick, we tell JavaScript, instead of the browser, we tell JavaScript to make the GET request. It gets the response, and then we do whatever we want with it. In this case, we update the DOM. Cool? Questions? Cool. So the big things with this are, and there's a longer write-up of this if you want to know more about promises, but just for our purposes today, I want you to just know how to deal with them when we're working with them, and do some further reading to like really kind of dig into how they work and operate. But the essential thing is it's an object that gets returned, and then it's basically saying you will get a value at some point. I will either tell you here is what you wanted, I'm still waiting for what you wanted, or I could not get what you wanted. Right?
Could we go back to the console log?
I'm not doing anymore, but we can.
Sorry, I just
No.
wanted to see that. Not that one.
Whoops. What?
What you just did, and then when it, like, if you have it put out that first title, how you had it before, the end part that you did.
Wait, this?
Yeah, that whole part, that whole thing.
Okay.
And then, I guess I'm gonna mess this up. Oh, I want to see what it looks like. Yeah, like, yeah, what if it shows that promise part in the inspection, like how you said?
Oh, like if we go this,
Yeah.
it's just going to put, so it's going to take this p tag that's empty right now and fill it in with the title. That's weird. I didn't know you could do that. Crazy.
So it's not a promise.
No, at this point, it's just text. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah, go
I was
ahead.
going to say one thing about when you use a web API like fetch or any one like set interval, for example, in those functions, you're not going to have access to the information until, like, say, like under it, he writes like console log, whatever he wants to say, right? That's going to actually run first before the promise comes back. The promise stays there until the end of the file is run. Does that make sense? I really confused when I was doing it. When he was saying to look at the documents for fetch, I was like, wait, why don't I have access to that right under there? It'll run the file before the promise does whatever it's supposed to do.
They saying it runs through the entire thing and then starts over.
No,
So that's you're getting at like how asynchronous functions.
yeah, exactly.
So like once it gets to that portion, it's going to run what's inside the fetch side by side with the program. So if you did like a console log after the fetch, that console log should print before the
Oh, I see.
Because the promise waits before. Are you saying the promise waits? Like this then won't run, or sorry, this then won't run until the promise is done from the previous one, right? Is that that's what you're saying?
Yeah, well, I'm saying also the rest of the file should run.
Right. It'll run. So so I'm putting this in a function right now. I got to illustrate one more thing before we move on. So now it's in a function, and I can just call the function, right? And if I had a bunch of other functions below this, like if this one got held up because it wasn't getting the response right away, everything else I wrote would still run. And that's what we mean by asynchronous, right? It doesn't have to wait. And that's why we have to deal with these promises and stuff like this. Otherwise, we're making one API call. Lots of sites are making dozens or maybe more, right? And if one of those gets held up, the whole site will break. So we don't want that to happen. So that's why, yes, the rest of the stuff in the file will still run. So I moved this into a function. It should work exactly the same way. Let's confirm that. It does. Let's get a different one just for the hell of it. Let's say 4. Oh, cool. More nonsense. Okay. So this is still working. So now this is a pretty standard way to use the fetch API. There is another way that works the same way, but syntactically it's different. And you might see it, so I'm just going to show it to you real quick, okay? But it's the same concept, but the syntax is different. So I'm going to comment this one out. I'm going to come down here. I'm going to write another function. I'm going to actually write the same function. Get to do. Except in front of it, I'm going to say async, like that. So now when I do async in front of a function, I'm telling JavaScript that I want to make it this asynchronous function. And if I do that, I have to do that. Then inside the function, instead of dealing with these thens, I can use this keyword called await. So this exact same thing will look like this. Sorry. Bad spell. Or actually, let's not return. Let's do what we were actually doing, which was this. Same exact thing. I think it reads a little nicer, but doesn't really matter, right? So we're saying make this an asynchronous function. If I have an asynchronous function, I cannot use this await keyword unless I have this, okay? Then I'm using this keyword, and all it's saying is make the fetch and wait to run the next line until the until the promise is resolved, right? Same exact thing. So instead of then, we're just saying wait, but we're doing the same thing. Cool? So both, as far as I have been able to read, and please let us know if you find it, these function the same way, and it's kind of just preference. Is there a difference?
I was just, when I was reading into it, I don't quite exactly remember how it works, but with the fetch and .thens, they said it was easier to get the callback held.
Yes.
I can't exactly remember what that was, but with async, because it's cleaner and it's easier to organize.
I think this is.
It helps prevent callback held.
Well, it's
I don't
just
really exactly remember.
Yeah.
When you nest
Exactly.
asynchronous functions using fetch, vice, async, it gets a lot more complicated.
I think it's really like what you're getting as a readability issue. Like if I had to do a ton of stuff before I like say a common thing will be like, I'm going to make a request to one API. Based on the data I get back, I make a different request. You know what I mean? And you're going down. You can see it would be like, first sign the user in to Facebook. Then go get their profile. Then go get all the comments. Then go get their, friends list or whatever, right? And you can see this would chain down. And actually here, I'll show you the old way of doing it was with, what's it called? Ajax, yeah, which is Ajax and, oh my God, what is it called? It's a thing, jQuery. This is what it used to look like, right? So this is making a call. If it's successful, it makes another call. If it's successful, it makes another call. But then the errors are all down here. It reads like in, right? Which gets super confusing. So then the fetch and then came up. And actually, more commonly, if you only have one line, just to illustrate that it's a little bit more readable, thens will usually look like this, unless there's a lot more for them to do. But this isn't too bad. If we only have one line, we can get rid of these parentheses, or these, and so you'll see stuff like this, right? Same idea here. It would be easier to just list a bunch of awaits. Whoops, that is not what I meant to do. Like this. This is so much easier to read, right? Okay.
Does the order matter?
Yes, absolutely. Because it's going to be, this is saying, like, don't do the next line, run the next line as soon as, like, line 13, don't run line 14 until line 13 is done. Don't run line 15 until line 14, right, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Sorry?
Do you need semicolons? I mean,
You don't need them. That's a holy war about, because you don't need them, and you don't need them, but some people.
It looks like it should be there. Is what I'm saying.
Okay, we cool on fetch and async and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, go ahead.
Fetch is pretty cool. It's like, say you need to access with API key or something. We only have the URL, but we're like, where do we put the API key or whatever our information, like header or whatever we want to put in there. There's you take another parameter.
Yep.
You put the object in there, and then that's what you'll put your key value pairs for all that stuff.
So you can also use, we're only going to use it for gets right now, but we will do this. This is just I don't want to jump too far ahead. But you can use fetch to make post requests as well. You can use fetch to like save data to the database. But that's like Friday. We're going to go over that, or Thursday or something, okay? So we will get to that for sure. But right now, we're only worried about getting data. Only worried about getting it. Go ahead, Bobby.
Asynchronous functions, those are functions that wait for the next line to run?
No.
Or they let the whole program and then that function run?
Asynchronous means I am not going to, basically I'm not going to hold up the rest of the program, right? So the next line is not dependent on the asynchronous function finishing. Okay. Whew. So that said, We'll get a little bit started here, and I promise we will take a break. Okay, so here's new site 3. I copied everything over. Let's start it up and just refamiliarize ourselves, and also hope it starts. I don't remember if I started this already. Fingers crossed. Cool. So this, look at that. Okay, so this is what we have so far. We have our nav bar. We have these. If I click on one, well, it should, is it taking me to the right one? Yes, okay. It's taking me to the right one. Now, again, all the data is being read from this JSON file, which is local, which is like inside my React project, right? So I want to get rid of that. So what we're going to do when we come back from break is we're going to get all of our data from an API. Now, thankfully, the API has been built for us. It is actually in the exact same repo. So here is our source folder, right, with all basically our all of our React stuff. Up here, API is our actual server. It's a server just like Django, but instead it's written in Express, which is JavaScript, right? So it's a server written in JavaScript. Don't ask me a lot of questions about how it works because I've never written a server in JavaScript. But I mean, take a look at it if you're curious. But we're not going to mess with this code at all. But just know that the way this project is built, when I did npm start, it actually started 2 servers for me. It started one on localhost 3000, which is going to serve up my React, and then it also started another one. Where does it say it? It started another one here on 3001. So there's a web server listening on 3001. So if I go to,
just think of Node and Express as Python and Django.
How'd you get that server? Did you do it? It was part of an extension or something, or?
I didn't build this at all.
Oh,
I don't know. Someone else
So
built
here
it.
is JSON file. You'll have a server in there that you'll reference, and
So that's your API. And that's the same thing that you were looking at with the fake.
Exactly.
But now it's part of your
But now it's part of our project, right? So we're running. So instead of hitting a server out in the world, we have 2 servers running on our computer, right? One is serving up our front end on localhost 3000. The other is serving up the API on 3001. Cool. And you can see it works exactly like that example I showed you. If I hit the endpoint, it returns me a bunch of article data, right? So what we're going to do when we come back from break is we're going to basically write a bunch of functions that get this data for us, and then we're going to learn how to tell React to update the DOM for us.
What if you just do localhost 3000?
I think because there's no endpoint there, it'll just give me an error. I guess it gives me whatever the hell this is. Yeah. But there's not like, we didn't tell, like, we have to write the route, right? Like, if we didn't tell Django what to do at / then it wouldn't return it. It would return a 404, right? I guess what this returns at / is started and uptime. So, I don't know. You can dig through the Express code, figure that out. Cool.
But this isn't a real API still.
It's real. It's
Yeah,
real.
it's really.
I mean,
You
it's,
put that on the internet because you're running it on local.
yeah,
can
you
have-
could deploy it to the internet, but it's not on the internet right
So it's just an API that's weird.
now. Yep, just
And
an
then you're
API.
gonna make a React app that works with the API.
Yeah.
But it's not.
None of this is on the internet. This is all running locally right now. Cool. Let's take 10, come back, and we'll actually do something.
What I did.
Yeah, Node and Express.
That